Hi everyone, and welcome back to another stream here. Today I am talking to David O'Brien. I'm just going to add him straight in. David, how are you, sir?
Greg, very well, thank you.
It's 6 o'clock in Geelong, Australia, is that right?
That's correct.
I can't believe you get up just for me. You normally get up early, or are you just up early because I wanted you to get you on the screen?
We've got a 1.5-year-old, and we're very lucky that, unlike most 1.5-year-olds, he really likes to sleep in. So I don't have to get up that early.
Nice. I'll try and keep my voice down.
So,
I know you from, I met you in Seattle last year, but I know you from doing your security startup product, which I really wanted to kind of pick your brain about. I don't really have any questions, but we're just going to wing this. So that's a very good start. Look, who's in New Zealand is saying security never sleeps. That's a very good point. Yeah, so you're a cloud security and compliance kind of consultant, is that right?
Yeah, pretty much been that for over a decade.
Give us a little intro to who you are for people who don't know who you are.
Yeah, David O'Brien. Funny accent because German Scottish, but I do live in Australia now for the last almost 10 years. It's already been 10 years, yeah. And always interested in security. With my German background, Germans are paranoid when it comes to anything security and privacy related. And as we now know, rightly so. I think years and years ago, people were calling people paranoid about it. Now we know there's a good reason. Always cloud, DevOps, that kind of stuff. But yeah, outside of work, I've been a private pilot for 20 years.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you about that later. We'll come back to that. Yeah, we'll come back to that if you don't mind. So, reading up on you, you have been a Pluralsight and a Pluralsight and a Cloud Guru instructor, yeah?
Yeah,
so how many courses have you done? What sort of stuff have you done courses on?
Not too many. I think maybe 3 or 4. I think mostly on just bespoke content on CI/CD, some just cloud foundations, some AWS stuff actually as well. So I've done AWS for quite a while. Probably 5-6 years of my career were just AWS. So I'm one of those cloud consultants that knows kind of
quite a lot of different clouds.
Yeah, both the big ones, and GCP now.
Nice.
Yeah.
I'll ask you about that later on as well, because it'd be good to get your opinion on stuff like that. So I'm going to ask you now so we can get out of the way. Ex-Microsoft MVP. I know you didn't want to talk about it, but let's just get it out of the way quickly. So you were an MVP for how many years?
9 years and 364 days.
That's painful. Did it hurt? You said it hurt.
Yeah, it did on the day. We MVPs, we ex-MVPs, no, we call it the F5 day, right? Because you're constantly hitting F5 on the inbox, and there's a couple of tricks to figure out if you are gonna get renewed or not. And none of those signs, because for us it's in the middle of the night, so we try to figure out in other ways without that email if we're renewed or not. And none of them were positive for me. And I've seen all these other people go, I'm renewed, I got it. And I thought, well, probably not then. It hurt in the moment, but I'm okay to talk about it now.
Yeah, that's a shame, especially when I've been 10. That's a shame.
Yeah.
So you're also a pilot, you're a dad. It says you're a sneakerhead. What's that? I really need to ask.
You got plenty of shoes in the background.
Yeah. Strongman as well. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, that's the Scottish side probably. I've been doing strongman for almost 4 years now. And it's essentially like Highland Games, not too unlike Highland Games. Just lifting heavy, weird stuff and picking it up and putting it somewhere. It's pretty
I think I do see you doing that. And I was like, I can't believe he's that size, because you're not the tallest guy in the world. You know, you're quite a short guy, but like, geez, all the stuff you could lift was unbelievable.
Yeah, it's very impressive what the body can do.
Right, let's talk about So, at what point did you think you wanted to do your own startup company? What point did that?
If you ask people that really know me well, probably go, I never really liked to be managed.
Yeah, to have a boss. Yeah, I know what you. I know what you mean. Yeah.
Like I'm absolutely fine arguing about things with people and accepting other people's opinions and all of that, but I always wanted to be the master of my own direction.
Yep.
And I had these ideas that very often just weren't picked up. And in hindsight, and I'm not saying I'm always right?
I know you.
But in hindsight, a lot of those ideas, if they had been picked up, I think lots of things would have turned out differently, and that's very vague now. But one of these ideas was I've been doing these cloud assessments and helping cloud security assessments and helping organizations make sense of what pen tests told them and what other security products told them, what in some cases what the MSSPs told them, for forever and ever and over again. And when I had my own consulting business with a couple of people, that remained a theme where we always were asked, can you help us make sense of this? And at some point, COVID hit and killed the consulting business, unfortunately. And I thought, well, what better opportunity to go and reflect a bit and just take this time where we can't leave. Yeah, we were in lockdown for almost 2 years here in Australia, or at least in Victoria here, and focus on building a product. And yeah, that's what I did.
Brilliant. So let's have a talk about that. So you wanted to build it. How do you go about it? Like how many? Well, let me ask this. How do you start off? Did you start off with some ideas and run it past people, or do you just go for it yourself? How did you go start?
Yeah. So always had that idea, right? And it really started. Oh, there we go. My monitor just died. It really started almost 3-4 years before I actually started Argos. And those were those ideas where one company, for example, got me in as a contractor, going, "Hey, can you find us a cloud security product?" And requirements were gathered and people interviewed, and started forming an opinion on the industry, really, much more so than before, and realized that there isn't really much out there that really fits certain people's criteria. And it's important to go, look, there are original ideas. I bet there are still original ideas out there, things that people have never seen. But in a lot of cases, we already have things, but they don't work for a certain persona in the industry. And once I decided, all right, I'm going to do it, for the first year and a half or so, I pretty much just spoke to people, lots and lots of people, and went, all right, tell me a bit about what it is you do, how do you do it, how do you currently do it, do you like it the way you do it, is there anything wrong about it, do you think there's something better to go about it, and it eventually, and it's important, I think, especially as a technical founder, to not try to lead people too much, because otherwise, because you're always going to have that bias that the idea you have is the right idea.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah,
especially as technical people,
definitely.
We want every single meeting we end up with in IT, right? We always end up in solution mode. Right? We can't help ourselves, right? We always go, we can do it this way, and we should be doing it that way. Well, step back, right? We always have to put ourselves back. And it was important that I reminded myself of that over and over again, because I'm also a solo founder. And so I don't currently have a co-founder. I'm working on that, but it really meant that I had to be that person. I had to build a network around myself that constantly reminded me of that, that I don't go and rush too far. But yeah, eventually, I think I came to a good idea. Well, not idea, but I cemented or concreted that the surroundings of that idea. And let's put it that way. And started drawing. Like what could this actually look like from a product point of view? And at that point, I was very happy because I could talk technology and what am I actually going to use to achieve the outcome.
So what sort of tools were you using at this point to kind of get your ideas down, and what sort of tools? Did you have like planning boards and that kind of thing? Did you have like Azure DevOps board or just a whiteboard behind you?
Initially, it was really just a whiteboard.
Oh, that's awesome.
And a whiteboard, lots of tea. I'm not a coffee drinker. I drink lots of tea. That's the overall British in me. I stood in front of that whiteboard and just drew and thought, okay, the other important thing starting a product like this is to not go and design for 10 years down the track, right? Yeah. But and I think that was important to me as well, especially for a security product, that it's also not a product or an application that runs on my laptop or on my desktop here. A lot of people go, "I'll just quickly build an MVP. It doesn't need to be amazing." And I think that's not necessarily true for a security product. In security, we have this assumption that, sure, there might be false positives, but we really don't like if we miss something. Because I'm not sure what happens here. Because if we miss something, that could really turn out to be a problem, right? We'd rather tell somebody there's a problem and it's not. That creates noise, however. But then not tell somebody about a problem and they get hacked, right? So I really needed to find that balance between what do I do at this point on day 0 that I should be doing without boiling the ocean.
How do you stop throwing, like, I always see companies, like I've been at 3 different companies in the past, and it's always like every idea ends up in the product. How do you go about not doing that? Because the more people you speak to, the more people have these great ideas and they want to just throw everything into the product.
Yeah.
Did you start off with the idea of having an MVP type thing where you just have a minimal product with certain things and then build on top of it? Did you start off like that?
Yeah. So I'm not telling and I'm not claiming that we did I don't know full on Kanban boards and Scrum and all of that. We didn't because initially it was myself and one developer. So that again would have been boiling the ocean and just going way too far. But yeah, it is really an issue if you talk to people and they go, "It would be amazing if." Or it would be so cool if, okay, would you pay money for it? Yeah. So, and if we do live in a world where we do need to make money, and you really need to. And initially, I can see that. Initially, I fell into that trap myself, right?
I think everyone probably does. Yeah.
Yeah. Like
so many times, to be honest.
Yeah. If Argos could do this or that. And I started working and thinking, and or in some cases already, there's probably a couple of dozen Git branches out there that have
ideas.
of ideas. And at some point, one of my really good advisors to the company went, David, you need to stop doing that. Like your question really needs to be.
Well, my question was going to be, did you have someone keeping you straight? So you've just answered that. So your advisor was keeping you right.
Yeah. So like I said, I'm a solo founder, and yeah, and everybody else in the business is a developer. So they're org chart under me. So they don't necessarily go, David, that's a stupid idea. They probably should in some cases, and they've already told me in a few times to stop writing code, because I tend to break things nowadays. But from a business point of view, yeah, it was super important to have these advisors, and there's a couple of them around for different areas. And yeah, one of them is really good at, David, figure out before you start writing code if it's actually something that people want and would be willing to pay money for. And because it sometimes might be that you're talking to a new persona, not a new person, a whole new persona, and they go, would be amazing if you did this. And you go, really? First time I hear that. But then you need to continue thinking about that. What's different about that person compared to the other people that are maybe already paying for the product? And then you need to find other people that look like that persona, that fit that persona, and figure out if they also need that thing that that person said, and then form that opinion. Yeah.
How do you, when you're starting a product, how do you determine what your MVP was? Or is that what you did? You determined what your MVP was?
Yeah, it really came down to, initially it was, this is what I want the product to do at a bare minimum. And the MVP, to be quite honest, looked very different to what the product looks like now. And the way really we determined, and it's probably the wrong way around, but again, technical background, technical founder, I led with the product, right? Maybe in hindsight should have done way more market research, but turned out all right. At least it got to a point where people went, I want that. And at that point, I knew
I
need to move the mouse. Not sure. Maybe because it's browser based. It thinks it needs to go to sleep. So the at some point, people said, I want that. I really like that, and I'm willing to pay money for that. And at that point,
how long did it take to get to that point?
Couple of months, half a year, of just pure development and market research. Lots and lots, probably a couple of hundred interviews.
Really?
Yeah. So there was a lot of talking for to really understand what people need, and because especially the cloud security space is busy. Yeah, there's lots of products in the cloud security space. So one person might have an idea, but is that just one person being opinionated, or is that really something the market wants? And it was really important to figure that out. If there's really a gap in the market.
And do you look at the other security tools to see what they do and what you might do that's different to them or they don't have?
Yeah. So kind of that's that one project, that one contract I was on years and years ago, and I never really stopped doing that. Right. I'm not saying we're copying other products. I think if anything, we're trying to not do what other products do. From a feature point of view, but also from a user experience point of view. as a former consultant myself, our product was supposed to be for consultants and for engineers, and we always hate wasting time, right? And that was super important to me for the product, that it's very easy, very quick to get going, and
Cool. Luke's got a very good question, so I'll let you read that and then you can answer it.
Right. So no, I didn't do the Silicon Valley thing that the show, right? Silicon Valley. If you haven't seen it, by the way, great show. In some ways, scarily accurate. In other ways, a bit over the top. But so how did I go from being employed to an employer versus self-employed? I was an employed consultant first, and went from there to start my own consulting business, and that's pretty easy in most cases, because if you have a brand, and look, everybody's looking for contractors, right? If you go onto LinkedIn and you put your open for work or something banner onto your profile,
I know all about that, yeah.
Right, you're going to get swamped with recruiters. So going from employed to self-employed as a consultant, pretty easy. Then I did that for a little bit, but then I thought, look, I have ideas. I think there's need for that in the market. I'm going to grow my consulting business, and hired a couple of people, and that really ended up putting quite a bit of profit into that company.
Right, good.
And that was the money that initially got invested into the product company.
Cool.
So that's really how that started.
Okay, there's a couple other questions. One I'm just going to laugh at because that's funny. I'll skip that question, and then I'll skip that one, and we'll bring up this one.
Oh, right. Anytime. Did I ever doubt myself? All the time, right?
Did you ever doubt it to the point where you thought about chucking it?
I think that happens quite regularly.
Okay.
And I think that's not because I don't think we're doing the right thing. It's a very emotional journey. So for me at least, and I know there's other startup founders that I know personally very well. It's the same for them. Most of them technical founders, and I think that's probably important here, because you talk to potential customers and they call your baby ugly, right? And today, for example, I'm very ecstatic because I woke up to an amazing email, and with a very large new customer that we're looking to onboard, and amazing start to the day. But early, exactly. But earlier in the week, a very large opportunity fell through. And at that point, you go, really, why? Right? It felt so good, and it is an emotional roller coaster. And I think it's important, and for my mental health, and I think that's something that people in many areas don't talk about enough. Like fatherhood. Nobody talks about the mental health and stability of fatherhood.
There's no way. What was it somebody said to me? There's no guidebook for being a parent.
Yeah. And for as a startup founder, it's super important to just to try to not ride that roller coaster too much, but like that daily up and down, but try to even it out.
People don't think about things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and it took me a while to get to that point, to understand that just because one person thinks your baby's ugly doesn't mean the rest of the
Totally.
industry does.
Totally. Yeah, that's a good point.
And
So
sorry, on that,
mhm.
because I think a lot of people, especially watching maybe some online shows and Silicon Valley, not everybody turns out to be a unicorn, a billion-dollar company, right?
Correct.
Yesterday, somebody told me if you believe in unicorns, you're either Scottish or stupid. So, and I thought that was interesting. Um, it, it, there's lots of external pressures, right? Starting a startup like this, a product, especially in this space, which is often very enterprise salesy. Yeah, we're not putting an application onto to the Android or iOS App Store and hope that maybe at least 1 million people are stupid enough to buy the product for $1. There's a long time for a product like this to go from making huge losses to being profitable. And in that time, I can tell you my mortgage went up a lot with all the global
I mean,
happening, right?
my
So
second job 20 odd years ago, we're a software dev company, right? Doing projects for everyone, and we started doing a product. And in our company, nobody knew how to build a product, and it didn't go very well. And after a year and a half, we were like, well, now we're in a bit of trouble because we've got customers who are using this, who are companies, and then we're kind of wanting to get rid of it. And people don't think about things like that either. It's actually difficult because you kind of just turn it off and stop supporting it and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So we eventually killed the product, and it wasn't much fun killing a product that you had worked on, but it just didn't. It never broke even, and it was never going to break even. And because the amount of time that you spend with a team of devs, paying them their monthly salary, it soon adds up.
Yeah.
And then when you go to sell the product that I was talking about, it wasn't really. I can't remember what it was. A mobile app for you could use. It was kind of one of these things where it was trying to do everything. It was a bit like the product thing that I said. Everybody's like, "Oh, it'd be good if we could do this." We ended up putting like 500 things into it. And it wasn't good at any of them.
Yeah.
So people were like, "Oh, it'd be great if we could," and we ended up spending a lot of time and didn't really sell it because people kept saying, "We'll buy it if it does this."
Yeah.
And it never really took off, and we ended up losing a lot of money because we spent so much time on this thing, and that's kind of why I wanted to get you on it and ask you this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Tricky thing to deal with. That's kind of like what people don't think about, especially when you're talking about losses at the start. I didn't really want to ask you too much about that, but you've obviously put a lot of time and effort into it before it becomes profitable.
Yeah. And look, not every startup needs to be profitable. I think that's also a thing that especially banks don't like to hear. If you're trying to get a mortgage, not every startup. Look, when Slack got acquired, by Salesforce, for I think $7 billion US, they were still losing, I think, $200 million a quarter.
Yeah,
right? They were not profitable. Not every startup needs to be profitable.
Just look at Twitter. When Elon Musk came in, he said it was losing $4 million a day. It's a bad example, but it's a good example of like how people think this is great, but if it's losing money, it's losing money.
Yeah, and at that point, it's more the value you put back into society.
Yeah. Let's talk more about what's the product built using, what technologies are you using? Because I'm really interested in that kind of stuff.
Yeah, of course. So as a former MVP, Microsoft MVP.
That's going to hurt, sorry.
I wouldn't have built the product anywhere on premises or in a data center, right? So cloud was non-negotiable. So at that point it was, all right, which cloud? And it was, it really was a thing I had to think about because naturally, a natural choice would have been Azure. Absolutely. Microsoft MVP have done Azure since before it went public in 2012 or something. So I've been doing Azure for a very long time, but pretty much I want to say 80% of all startups that you talk to, they are on AWS.
Yeah.
And AWS wanted to throw a lot of money at us, and
really?
like all of them do. Like they have amazing startup programs, and I think that's important for people also to know. If you want to start a startup, you can pretty much online just go to AWS, Google, Microsoft, sign up to a program, and you're going to get a couple of $1,000 in credits, just like that.
Well, we have a customer in Spain who do mobile banking type stuff, and they had a startup idea, and they went to Microsoft startup. They got 150 grand.
Yep.
Yeah, and I was like, what? And they're like, yeah, and I was like, wow, that's amazing.
There's always a catch with that.
Yeah.
Those credits are only valid for 12 months.
I didn't realize this until we were about halfway through the starting of the project, and I said to the guy, I was like, we're kind of using the expensive tools here. How long does your money last? And they said 12 months, and I was like,
yeah,
okay, we need to change the design because this is going to cost you a fortune, and we did. But I was glad we caught that. So that's a very good point. People think that money lasts until it's used. It doesn't. No.
Nope.
So did you get a grant from AWS? I take it for a year.
So we did because part of Argos does run on AWS because we also support AWS, and it's much easier to have a part of the application run on the platform and to talk to other AWS customers than go from external to AWS. So yes, we have gotten some credits from AWS, but in the end, I decided that my affinity to Microsoft and my knowledge in Azure was just much deeper at that point than was AWS. So I started designing Argos for Azure, and then had to make decisions like, okay, cool, Azure, which services? What are we going to do?
And are you doing this yourself? Or are you bouncing ideas off people? You're doing it yourself?
Yeah, so it was mostly me, but designing it. But a lot of people asked, or I've asked a lot of people going, what do you think about that? Right? I reached out to the product teams directly.
Oh, good idea.
Because, spoiler alert, we are using Cosmos DB in the background. So our backend is full Cosmos and SQL API on Cosmos. And there were a lot of nightmare stories on Cosmos DB out on the internet.
Yeah, when it first came out, it was super expensive if you didn't kind of set up the partition IDs correctly, and the sharding was all wrong, and people were going, this is costing gazillions, and they just set it up wrong because they didn't know. That was quite a hard decision, though, I thought, to get the partition ID right and stuff like that.
Yeah, and look, over the time, we had to change a couple of things on Cosmos.
I was going to ask that. How much have you had to redo? Have you had to redo a few things?
Yeah, we did, because with every database, not just Cosmos, every database, your schema design is important, right?
Cosmos is good for that, though. You can change the schema really straightforward, really easily, which people don't really understand. Yeah,
right. Because technically they don't care, but the problem is the way we do our things, and if you like, we can eventually get into a bit more, even deeper detail. But the way we do things, Cosmos's document size limits are 2 megabytes. So for one thing that you store, it can only go up to 2 megabytes in text in JSON, right? That's a lot of text. Don't get me wrong, a lot of text. But the way we do things, and in certain scenarios, we foresaw that
you're going to join documents.
So you can't join on Cosmos.
You can't join, but you can still. There's a way. There's something like a join, though, isn't there?
So one, you can break them up, or you just put them into different containers. So so you can't join because it's not relational, and but just yesterday, actually, we realized that one thing It was a very quick and easy fix, but one thing would have blown out a particular document, and we had to move that out into a different container, into its own container. And now we're fine. And that change, we quickly designed an API, like a migration API, and that's going to take maybe 10 seconds to run in production once we kick it off. And
I've never really done that in Cosmos, but I did it in RavenDB many years ago, so it was the same sort of concepts. Yeah, RavenDB used to be interesting. It was the same sort of ideas. The problem with RavenDB that we had was that we didn't index properly, which meant it got really slow. So the website serving the data eventually got really slow. So you're using Cosmos? Yeah, I'm a massive fan of Cosmos. I really do like it.
Yeah, it's really easy to develop against. It's important, however, to understand how certain SDKs actually query Cosmos. Not all of them, because without going too much into how Cosmos works, those request units, they can get expensive, right? And, Cosmos scales based on these request units. And in some cases, depending on which way you build your query, at what point do you go and do your partition key query or filter, and then what other words you use in your query, what other keywords you use, that can make a massive difference on request units. And
which eventually means cost, doesn't it?
Yeah, right. Which means cost. And initially, we used a certain SDK to get some details out of and into Cosmos. And we thought, why is our cost blowing out at the moment? Like we keep a good eye on our cost, but we made a change. We deployed that change, and we thought that's not right.
Yeah, that sounds not right.
And we realized when we then looked in our log analytics, what the actual queries were, that they worked, but
back too much.
Way too big, big. And we then stopped using that SDK and actually built our own Cosmos DB query in that case.
I genuinely think that's what puts people off using Cosmos, because you need to have a good understanding of what you're doing when it comes to that kind of stuff. Writing queries can make a cost difference. Yeah, and I'd love more of our customers. A lot of our customers do use it, but I think a lot of people struggle because you've got SQL DBAs, but there's not really too many Cosmos NoSQL DBAs that you can just go, can you please sort this query? That's the problem you've got. And I love trying to fix these kind of things, but I bet that was a kind of eye-opener when you started seeing the costs going up.
Yeah, it was. But the good thing is, and I've worked with so many startups in the past that build things in the cloud, that where the people building it were amazing developers, but didn't fully understand cloud. And that was Microsoft Azure and AWS, just the same, right? No difference. And I think luckily, I put certain things in place before we started building, where it just made sure that even though we had credits and technically it was funny money that was spent,
money doesn't exist.
It was important for us to monitor our cost, because as I said, at some point they expire, and then the credit card gets charged, and if you don't know how much you're actually spending, because you didn't pay attention to it, then that first month after the credits can be super expensive.
I can imagine. Yeah. So you're using Cosmos. What other sort of things are you using, if you can go into that kind of detail?
Yeah. Look, for the longest part of my early career, I've worked purely on virtual machines, and I always hated it. I always thought it's such a waste of effort.
Right? I wasn't expecting you to say virtual machines there. Interesting.
We're not, right?
I don't think you would be now.
Yeah, we're not using VMs. That was the preamble to that, because I always thought it's a massive waste of people's time. And look, the industry, Microsoft was the first one to go, you don't need VMs, right? Azure initially didn't have a VM offering. And that was kind of Azure's issue initially, because the industry wasn't at that point yet, where everybody who wanted virtual machines and wanted to go into the cloud looked at the two clouds and thought, Microsoft doesn't have any VMs, Amazon has, we're going Amazon. That feels like home. So especially as a small team, building a product, you can't waste time on things that don't eventually make you money. So deploying a VM is easy, and lots of people stop at that point. However, deploy the VM. See, I stopped moving the mouse. And, so they deploy the VM, and that's where they stop. But you need to patch it. You need to secure it, right? It needs to automatically come back up. All of these things we didn't want to do. So naturally, we look at some serverless solution. And Argos does not use any containers, by the way.
Okay, I was thinking that might be my next question.
So we're full on Azure functions.
I was going to say serverless. Yeah, okay.
So we're fully Azure functions because they super nicely integrate with everything else we do. All the developers need to do is look at the requirements, at the business requirements, and write code for those requirements. Don't have to worry about how do I deploy this onto IIS or anything. How do I make sure it runs on Kubernetes in some way? How does it, like, what ingress services? None of that.
To be honest, I'm a little bit surprised more people don't do what you're doing, if I'm being honest. A lot of people started doing that and then they moved to containers, and I'm like,
Now we now have over 180 functions. And
but most of that's running free, I take it, because you're not. Will you be doing 1 million hits a day, or?
Yeah, we have around. Last time I checked, I think 40 million events a month.
Okay. So that's just over 1 million a day, right? Okay, So you'll be paying a little bit for that, but most of that's free.
Yeah, correct. So it's not actually that expensive, our application.
No, I was going to say, you move that to AKS, that cost's going to go up big time. I don't care what this is. That's going to cost a fortune compared to what you're paying right now.
Correct. And not just in runtime, right? I think a lot of people forget that you then need to manage AKS. You need to it's container apps is going to change that in some ways. If you want to go down that path, but then you still need to understand the whole Kubernetes ecosystem. We don't need that. We don't need anything out of the Kubernetes ecosystem at this point, right? And because our application is it's a monolith at this point. Even though we have all these functions and discrete functions, it's one binary that gets two binaries that get deployed.
Well, I'm going to hazard a guess here. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but your front end calls Azure functions, which call is APIs. Is it going to be like the what do you call it? The Azure REST APIs? Is that what you're doing from functions?
Like the product itself, you mean? So we all our function or the scanning functions, they talk to the cloud APIs directly.
REST APIs.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah, because I tried looking at this. I mean, I'm building a wee thing on my own at the moment, and I thought I'll start off with the SDKs because I've never looked at the SDKs, and I was like, 10 minutes into it, I was like, well, this is not what I was expecting, because half the things I wanted to query don't have an SDK, and you're like, okay, this is not what I was expecting. I thought the SDKs would be like super complete, but they're not. So I went back to Postman and the REST APIs. Now that's super simple to do, and really cool, really straightforward. Is that kind of what you're calling the REST APIs?
Yeah, so we probably have a 70-30 split at the moment. Because we don't have to create a lot. Well, we don't have to create anything. We're just querying. So a lot of the SDKs do allow us to query a lot already. and it's really for the remediation side of the product, where we then have to make changes, where we sometimes have to fall back to the REST APIs, because certain things have just not been moved into the new SDKs yet. And yeah, I agree. The new SDKs are a bit interesting.
Yeah, I was just a little bit surprised and a little bit let down. I was a bit like, is this it? Like, no, is this it? That sounds terrible. But I was expecting them to be like an SDK for everyone, and there just isn't.
Yeah,
my main thing was I was wanting to query reservations, right? I want to query reservations and look at them and find out when they're expiring and be able to renew them and do all that. And then I was like, no, there's no SDK for this. And I was like, okay, I'll come back to this. And I haven't really got back to it. But I don't even think there's a REST API for that stuff yet. But
for one example that we do, we query your cost, right? Your cost management, just so we know what to charge. If you're a service provider, because charging works a bit differently there. But yeah, there is an SDK for cost management, but you can't get the actual cost. So you end up in your browser, in your development tools, F12, and just figure out, all right, what's the browser calling? Right, that API. Is there documentation for that?
Not really.
Not always.
No, I know. It's kind of weird because I just thought this would be in a better position than it is. I mean, and I get they're working on it. I'm not trying to say bad things, but I was a little bit surprised the state of play. I mean, the REST APIs are super simple. So I just basically went into Postman. I wrote down all the things I want to query. I wrote the queries, got it all back, and then build the front end on top of it, and it works great.
Yeah.
So that's the way to go, right? The APIs first, and then you can put any front end on it. That's what I was always taught. You can make it pretty later. So I'm building a wee app, and it's good fun. So you're using serverless, you're using Cosmos, you're using the SDKs, and okay, cool. What sort of front end are you building? What's that building?
Angular on Azure Storage.
Nice. So that'll be cheap as well.
Yeah, nothing. Maybe like the most expensive bit about our front end is the CDN in front of it.
Okay. And how much do you do any caching of queries or anything like that? Do you cache anything?
Not at this point, no.
No, you don't need to do that.
We don't have any Redis or anything at the moment. Right. Cosmos now has its own internal cache that you can turn on.
Didn't know
that. Which is similar to Redis, so it's read-only cache. The thing is that at this point it's just not worth it for us, because turning it on is going to cost a couple of $100 a month, which in itself is fine, right? It's just that that's a very, very big percentage already of our actual cost. And,
really? Oh, wow, that's impressive.
So big enough to go, at the moment, we don't need it.
Yeah. Well, that's fine. Good. I mean, it sounds like you're running a really nice app for not a lot of money, which is the way to go.
Yeah, and again, all the premises for the design where we need to be able to focus on the actual business use case and not
building everything.
How do I deploy this web app onto a VM? How do I our front end? All we do, like our CI/CD. So we use GitHub Actions for CI/CD, and we use Pulumi. I know you had a chat with Sam.
Yeah, that was good. I was really impressed with that.
Yeah, I love Pulumi. Huge shout out for Pulumi. And much better than the other thing that people tend to use.
Have you done Terraform as well?
I've done plenty of Terraform.
And you prefer Pulumi?
Yeah, because it's knowledge that you can actually use outside of infrastructure as code.
Yeah, and that's the thing that I think I put my foot in it the other night there by saying Pulumi is probably not for operations people, but I guess that's not true. But you do need to be able to write code properly, with proper code.
But Terraform, HCL, if you really want to run it in a large-scale environment, you also need to know how to write code.
I've not done Terraform because I've not had any need to do it, so it's not something I've spent time on. Yeah, So that's like your product. You need to be careful about spending time on stuff that's not going to make you money and doing the wrong thing.
Yeah, and all our developers, they understand to a certain extent how JavaScript works. And our front end is written in TypeScript, Angular.
How many folk have you got in a team? Is it all right if I ask how many people do you have in your team in total?
We're in total we're 4 people.
That's amazing. Like, that's really cool.
And we decided, look, if everybody understands to a certain degree TypeScript, then we're just going to write our infrastructure as code in TypeScript. So we use TypeScript Pulumi. And our GitHub actions are super, super simple. All our deployments happen, it can happen all the time. Like, we have 0 downtime deployments. Because Azure functions, they just go like that. Our front end, Azure storage, goes like that.
Amazing.
Yeah, very, very simple.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not really sure why more people don't do the whole. See, when I started looking at Azure Functions, I was like, this is the way to do the middle tier. You know, remember the front end, middle tier, back end thing? I always thought, like, at that point, Cosmos, I was playing a bit with Cosmos, and I was still probably writing functions to SQL. But yeah, I really need to get into it. I was even looking at the other day, something that popped into my head was when in Azure. Well, I haven't really used Event Grid. Did you use Event Grid at all for anything?
Now we use storage queues and durable functions. Storage
queues, right? Okay. Because I was thinking about, like, how do we monitor secrets and key vault certificates expiring? And then I saw somebody write a blog post. I was just thinking about this, and I saw this on LinkedIn where this guy's like, "Oh, you're right." In fact, it was a guy I was talking to on here. He's like, "You can get an event in key vault, and it'll tell you when it's about to expire." And I was like, So I'm quite interested in doing that, but putting it into like an event grid type thing where all these events go into event grid, and then I can decide which events to look at and do that. So yeah, I'm going to try and play a bit with that. But yeah, that's quite interesting. So Luke thinks you've got very smart doing your front end and storage. Awesome. What's he saying here? The decisions on how this is put together. I mean, that's why I wanted to get you on. I really wanted to see if you would tell me how you do it. Not that I'm just love the fact that you've done this. So and you've not had any huge and the learnings from it as well. So yeah, I think it's interesting. I don't think there's enough people talk about this stuff. You know, I was a guy who built an architecture thing last year in the Festive Tech Calendar, and he came on and he was explaining it all, and I was like, more people should do that. Really should.
Look, I don't believe in secret squirrels, right? Would
you ever publish a diagram of how you've done this, like an architecture diagram?
I can show it to you now.
Go for it. Like, let's do that if you can, because I like seeing this kind of stuff.
I say that, and now I have to go and find it.
No, take your time. Yeah, I mean, I'm quite keen to see how people do stuff. Cost is obviously a large learning point. Yeah.
Like our architecture diagram is really, really simple. It's not an architecture diagram like what an architect would typically do. Let me just. How do I share this?
Oh, if you do present at the bottom.
There we go.
Click on share screen. I'll add it, and then we can have a look at it. So it'll pop up. It'll pop up my end, and I'll just do add.
Just do this.
Right, let me move us out of the way so we can see it a bit bigger. Right, cool.
All right.
Using Offlow and Stripe. Okay, cool.
Yeah. So
So you're using Azure functions that go to AWS. How's that work?
Yeah. So we have a certain we have a way to assume permissions on AWS. Okay. So there's a few things on AWS you need to do, and then our Azure functions, they just run the AWS SDK, and they can assume a role or an identity on AWS. Fairly straightforward. Same thing on GCP. Similar to you get a token from AAD. So the only thing
is you can't call it AAD anymore.
Entra, sorry.
More joke.
But But yeah, look, it's really, really simple. We have our
that was really simple.
functions.
Yeah, I don't know why people don't do more of that.
Yeah.
So what? Let me ask you, what are you using durable functions for? What does that do? Function state management.
Yeah.
So you're storing the state of durable functions. So your state for your calls from your Azure
yeah,
functions.
there's quite a few things that depend on each other within our app, where we have long running tasks that we kick off from one main function basically. That breaks off into smaller, like whenever we kick off a scan of a customer environment, that's one function, and then that kicks off just so we can more easily respond to failures. Sometimes an API call fails and we need to retry, but we don't want the whole lot to fail. We break it off into essentially every single resource provider on Azure that we need to call. It's going to get broken up into its own function. And so that
I'd love to see how that works. I'd love to maybe one day I'll jump on a call with you and you can show me this off stream. But I'd love to see how that works.
Yeah,
I kind of want to do something similar. I kind of want to build an app that will go to a subscription and bring everyone back. And you're already obviously doing all that, so I'm not going to steal your idea, obviously. But yeah, that sounds awesome.
But the great thing is, it's all built into functions, right? We didn't have to do too much to make it work. There's API calls, internal API calls you need to do, you need to make to get that state. But like functions take care of a lot that you don't have to do when you break out into all these small other functions. You just go task await, right? So we're .NET application, and you just wait for these other tasks to finish, and then you react to the end results of that. Very easy.
You should do this as a TED talk. This is awesome. Yeah, I'm so glad you're kind of showing this. This is really cool stuff. Yeah.
And look, for our identity, we're one of these products that don't believe that you should be paying for a single sign-on or MFA.
Yeah, I saw that on your website. That's cool as well.
Yeah, so we use Auth0. We don't use B2C or Entra B2C now. We use
B2C.
we use Auth0.
What do you think of Auth0? Do you like it?
Yeah, we really like it. It took us maybe 15 minutes to integrate it.
Oh wow!
That's a lot. It's super simple to get it into your app. Super simple. Which once we've done it, I'm even more offended now when people go, you have to pay to get MFA or a single sign-on. Because it's so simple and it's not expensive.
You could do 10 TED Talks from this. This is awesome stuff.
Yeah. Auth0 had a really good startup tier. So even if we had gone beyond the free tier, it would have still been super cheap.
I'm dying to ask you how much this costs a month, but I'm not going in because I think that's a little bit rude. But yeah, this is brilliant. I mean, I could start and talk to you about this all day. This is kind of why I wanted you on. This is cool stuff.
And look, from day zero, we put everything into App Insights and Log Analytics, right? So we can go, and if anything ever happened, we can go and get the logs, or if there's exceptions, or we can very easily troubleshoot them. Everything very easily goes into Key Vault. All our secrets are encrypted in Key Vault. But you can see there's not a lot of moving parts.
No, there's not. There's really not. So how many regions does this run on currently?
2.
So Australia and
Amsterdam.
West Europe, okay.
So West Europe.
What do you do for? I always like to ask people this. What do you do for disaster recovery?
Yeah, so our disaster recovery plan is to redeploy.
That's what I thought you were going to say that. and how long does that take? Does that take maybe deploy all of that? What's that? Sorry,
less than an hour.
You know the amount of people that I ask, the amount of customers that I speak to, and I say, "What's your disaster recovery plan?" And they're like, and I'm like, "Yeah." That's my next startup idea. Doing disaster recovery properly for people, because I just don't think it's something that people really do. They kind of talk about it, but Yeah.
So the whole deployment, like look, here's a SaaS, right? Or Zero is a SaaS, Stripe's a SaaS. So you kind of have
They're
to.
always there. Yeah.
So you have to trust that they're there, right?
Yeah.
SendGrid for emails.
Mhm.
But Cosmos has backups out of the box. So we rely on those continuous backups. That we can then restore those.
I'm looking at this, right? I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, Azure Functions, what did you say, 40 million a month? That must be almost free. Storage accounts, free. SendGrid, we'll come back to that. Stripe, Auto. SendGrid's probably going to be the most expensive thing in this.
We're not paying anything for SendGrid.
Oh, are you not? Oh, well.
No, we're still on the free tier. We're still on the free tier.
Really? That's phenomenal.
Yeah.
Good.
So really, the big cost are those two here, Cosmos and Functions.
I thought Cosmos might cost you a wee bit, but okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That's amazing. Yeah, let's leave it at that, but I could spend all day talking to you about that, but I don't want to keep you too long. Right, just before we do wrap up, I got some banners to show your... So to get in contact with David if you've got any questions, because I have probably got 500 more. That's him on Twitter. He's on LinkedIn here. And if you ever want to try out his tool, which I highly recommend, you can go to argos-security.io. I need to now that I've got my MVP thing back, I need to speak to you about getting access again, because I was struggling with money. My account had run out of credit, so I was like, I need to wait to speak to you again.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you so much for getting up so early in the morning. You too as well. Luke, thanks very much. Awesome session.
I think it's already 10 a.m. for Luke. So
yeah, no, he's a slacker. I'm only joking. Luke was saying, for your information, that's the old Azure logo. Where I don't know where he was talking about.
Oh yeah, that architecture diagram hasn't changed in almost 2 years.
I mean, even that's impressive. That's impressive.
Yeah.
Okay, so just before we go, tomorrow I'm speaking to Veronica. I'm going to kill her surname. Kolesnikova, who is an AI expert. So I met her at Ignite, and we were chatting in fact, we were chatting last year about how AI is not really a thing, and then all of a sudden it's exploded. So amazing. So she's going to come on and talk about OpenAI and generative AI inside Azure. So that'll be good. David, thanks very much. Have a good Friday.
Thank you.
Friday. I'm glad you got some good news as well, and thank you for coming on the show. I might get you back on to explain some other stuff at some point, because I've probably got 500 questions about some of the stuff you're doing. Really, really enjoyed that session, so thank you once again. So just remember, smash the like button on your way out if you don't mind on Twitter. Let me just play the outro video, and then that'll be us. Thank you once again.
Thank you.